Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Arcserve webinar. Today's webinar is the third and last of the UDP version 6.0 features series. And in today's webinar, we'll be looking at the UDP cloud and tape integration and how we can perform offloads for archival long-term storage to tape, and how we can also leverage cloud as a file copy, backup, and again, long-term archive location as well. My name is Armin Jihanian. I'm the pre-sales consultant for Arcserve, and I'll be presenting today's session. Before we begin, if anyone has any questions during the session, please feel free to use the questions or the chat panel to type those questions in, and we'll take a look and answer those questions towards the end of the session. During today's session, we'll be looking at a few of the different features available that leverage or that can leverage cloud and tape, and they include the UDP file copy feature, the UDP file archive feature. We'll see how we can use replication to get recovery points into a cloud-based RPS, and we can also look at the copy to tape and subsequently cloud capability as well. For each of these different features, we'll also be running through a live demo on how this can be configured. So starting with the UDP file copy feature. File copy was a feature that was introduced with Arcserve D2D, and with the introduction of Arcserve UDP, it is a feature that we've basically kept and added more to. With Arcserve UDP file copy, what we can do after a UDP backup of a node is performed, we can nominate and select particular folders, and then within these folders select individual files to be copied to another location. This location can be another local disk or a shared drive on a NAS, for example, or it can go to cloud storage, such as Amazon S3 or Microsoft Azure. We can select one or multiple directories, and we can select the retention for files based on time period, or we can choose to keep a certain number of copies that are sent to that other location. With that said, let's take a closer look at how the file copy feature can work in Arcserve UDP. So I'm just going to open up my Arcserve UDP console. So when you log into the console, we can see the dashboard, and we've covered the dashboard in previous webinars. But to continue to set up file copy, we'll go to the Resources tab within the console. And you'll see here within, excuse me, within the Resources tab, we start seeing the list of all nodes. These are all the servers, workstations, and VMs that are available and that we're performing backup on. And then we're going to go to the Plan section, because setting up file copy is done within a plan. Now I've got an existing plan that I'm going to modify. So I've got a backup for client machines here. So I'm going to click on this client backup plan. And you'll notice that I already have a backup configured that will back up this particular machine called LR01PC. Now this is backing up the C drive and the D drive on this particular machine, and I have system reserve volume, recovery volume, and boot volume also selected. To perform a file copy, we obviously need to have, first of all, a backup plan configured. Once that's done, such as in this case, we can then click on Add a Task. We now have task 2 within this plan, and we're going to select file copy in the task type drop-down. So when we select file copy here, we now ask, what is the source? What are we going to be copying? So we can choose to copy from particular backup types. So in this example, I only have weekly backups for this particular machine, which is why only the weekly backups is visible for selection from the types of recovery points. I can select that so that after weekly backups are performed, then a file copy will be performed. The other option that's available is selecting the bottom radio button and selecting a file copy to happen after every X number of backups. So this will include manual or custom backups that are also performed. So if I want a file copy to be performed after every backup, I can put 1 in this field, and then I need to define what is the directory or directories from which the files are going to be copied. So I can click on Add Source Path here, and I need to define a source folder. So this needs to be from a drive that has been backed up. So I might choose, I know that on this particular machine, I might want to copy files from a directory called Kodi. Now I have some XML file configuration files for this application there. So I'm going to add this in. And then I can click on Add a Filter. I can then define whether a file it contains or has a particular extension or file type. So I can choose to include or exclude those. I have a list of predefined extensions. So if, for example, you had Office files, you could choose those to include Word, Excel, PowerPoint files, and so on. You can choose images, internet-related files, and so on. In my case, I want to copy all of these, but I also have an exe in there. So I want to choose all files that are not executables. Other filters I can include is a particular file name or folder name, as well as the file type that we just saw. Once you've selected the filters, we can click OK. And then if I wanted to add any further folders, I could click on Add Source Path again and put another folder in. For now, for this demonstration, I'll leave it at this directory here. We can then go to Destination. And here we're going to choose where our secondary location is going to be. We can see from the destination type, we can choose either a network share or cloud storage. If I was to choose the network share, I can put in a share path. So for example, I might want to send this to a NAS that I have. So when you put a path in, you can hit the green arrow, provide your credentials, and then we can hit Browse, and we can look at the different folders within this particular location. So here I might do a new folder, not under copy RP, I want it under UDP, and I want file copy demo as an example. So now I'll put it into this folder, and then I can choose to enable compression and encryption into this destination. From a retention perspective, I can choose to retain a certain number of file copies, or I can choose to retain file copies within a particular time period. So I might want to choose to keep only the last 1 month's worth of files that have been copied. From the destination, I might want to send this to a cloud storage location instead. So I can click on Cloud Storage, And when I do that, I then have the option of choosing what kind of cloud storage I'll be sending this to. So you can see we've got options for Amazon, Azure, and some other cloud providers as well. If you want to send to Amazon, we can choose Amazon S3. If you've already defined an Amazon storage previously, there'll be an entry in the drop-down here. But if it's your first destination, we can click on Add. And then you can put in the details for the different your account details for Amazon and choosing your region and so on. Now I want to draw your attention to the bucket region. Not every single bucket region will always be listed here. Obviously Amazon provides additional regions on an ongoing basis. So if you find that the region you want to use is not listed here, that's not a problem. What we can do is we can cancel this particular cloud account and we can choose to add an Amazon S3 compatible destination. And if I click on Add, I might give this a storage name. So for example, I might choose S3 Sydney. And then what I can do is I can put in the endpoint URL. So if I actually go to the Amazon website, I will find that the endpoint URL for Sydney is this. I can then put in my access PID, and I can enter my secret key, and then I can put a bucket name in here. So I might do UDP file copy demo. And then if I want to, I can choose to enable the reduced redundancy storage. So on happy, I can click OK, and it will try and connect using those credentials and settings. And you'll see there, it's accepted it. I now have cloud storage at S3 Sydney, and I can choose to enable compression and encryption. And again, I can choose different retention. So maybe I want to choose to keep the last 5 versions of the file. Lastly, I'll go to Schedule, and then I can choose when the file copy takes place. So I might want the file copy to happen after a recovery point or a backup is created. Or I might do a file copy based on a schedule, so it does file copy every day or every month, and certain days of the week, perhaps if I'm doing daily, at a certain time. I'm going to leave this to do it after a backup is made. And then once the settings are in place, I can hit Save. And the first time you set up a file copy job, you have an option to run a pre-flight check. What this will do is it will check if the folders you've defined and the settings you've put in place are going to be valid, so that when it comes time to do the backup of file copy, it will successfully be able to perform it. So I'm going to say yes, and it's going to go ahead and do a pre-flight check in the background. Now I can wait for my backup window to come around and run a backup, or because I've selected to do a file copy after every single backup, I can come to my nodes list, I can come to this LR01PC, I can right-click and I can kick off a manual backup immediately. So I'll click OK. In a few seconds, that's going to kick off the backup. If we go to Jobs, we'll see that a backup is in progress. And this is an incremental backup, so it shouldn't take very long. And after the backup job completes, we will have a file copy job take place. So we can see here the backup is already 3/4 of the way through. The backup is now completed. In a few seconds, we'll see that the backup job will be completed and disappears. we'll have a file copy job start. So you can see there now, file copy is in progress. If I click on details, I can get a pop-up that gives me some additional information. So you can see here it's progressed to the syncing file copy catalog stage. And obviously, the speed of the backup is going to be dependent on your bandwidth and the speed of the source machine. I'm going to close this. I'm going to let that backup, that file copy, progress in the background. And we can come back and take a look at the file archive feature of UDP. So UDP file archive is related to file copy. It actually works in a very similar way, except with file archive, what will happen is after the file is copied across, the source file will be replaced with a stub file which contains the location of where that file is being sent to. Again, the secondary location where we are archiving or sending these files off can be a share path or it can be cloud storage. Again, we saw the same cloud providers as before, Amazon, Azure, and others. And we can also select, based on different criteria, what files are moved. So maybe you want to move files that haven't been accessed within a certain amount of time, or files that were created 3 months ago, as examples. To set up file archive, it's done in a very similar way. So let's go back to the UDP console. So we come back here, we can see the file copy for the previous job has just finished. And if we come back to our resources tab, we'll come back to the plan section. And let's come back to our client backup here. And this time, we're going to add a task again. However, we're going to choose File Archive. Note that we have a warning here, or a note saying that a file archive will delete the source file after a successful copy. So again, I'm happy to proceed with this. We choose our source path. So again, I'm going to choose that Cody directory before. Add a filter. So again, I'm going to choose a file that is not an executable. And I have additional filters I can set when I'm archiving off. So I might want to archive files that are of a certain size. So I can choose less than, greater than, or file sizes that are between certain sizes. Or I can choose filters based on age. So in my case, I'm happy to keep this particular filter in place. So I'll say OK. And to add additional folders, you can click on Add Source Path and define those other folders. We'll then go to Destination. And again, if we're going to cloud storage, we can choose a different provider or service. Now, if you recall, I already created a cloud storage destination previously. So we can see here, cloud storage is saying S3 Sydney here. And I can choose to enable compression and encryption and choose what the retention time is going to be on that cloud device. Maybe I want to increase this. Maybe you want to have a 99-year retention. Lastly, I'll go to the schedule, and I can choose when I want the file archive to run. And maybe I want this to run daily at 6 p.m., for example. I can save this now. Again, you have a question about pre-flight check. In this case, I'm going to say no. And now, when that time for the file archive comes around, it'll go ahead and move those particular files. Now, if I want to recover files from file copy location, I can do that. I can right-click on, I'll go back to my nodes. So it was LR01PC that I was doing the file copy on. If I right-click and log in to the agent on this particular machine, I can click on Restore, and you have options here to browse file copies. So if I click on this, what it will do is it will see where the locations are for the file copies. And again, this being now cloud-based, it can take a little bit of time to connect depending on your internet connection. So here you found the file copy location. It's populated that field up there. Now loading the content of that location. So you can see here, it was files that were copied from the D drive on the source box. So it's expanding that now. We want to see that Cody folder. We expand that again. In a few seconds, we should see this expand. And here are the two XML files that I've uploaded that were copied across from the source. Now you'll notice that these files have ones in brackets next to them. If I click on it, the number in the bracket denotes how many different versions or copies of that particular file are available. So if these XML files had changed between different file copies, remember I had defined to keep up to 5 different copies of the same file. So that would increase, so I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And by clicking on the file itself, I will have a list of the different versions with a date and timestamp for those different versions. And I could then select that version. I can go next. And I can continue with the restore process. That file will be restored back to the on-prem server. I can choose a different location. If there's an existing file, I can choose to rename or overwrite or skip the file. And if I click next, it'll proceed with the restore process. So restoring from a cloud location, if you've done a file copy, is very straightforward. So you just do it through restore and browse the file copy location. So I'm just going to close this and we'll go back to our presentation and we'll take a look at how we can use replication and use a cloud-based recovery point server to protect cloud-based workloads, as well as using a cloud-based RPS as an off-site location to house our backups. So we can see here in this particular diagram, we have two on-prem recovery point servers. So one might be at our production site or primary site, along with the UDP console for management. We might have another on-prem RPS that might be at a DR site or in a different location. So we have two physical servers that we control and we manage. But then we might have some cloud instances that are doing particular workload in the cloud. and we'll set up another recovery point server in the cloud as well. In this particular setup, those cloud-based instances can back up to the cloud-based RPS. So all the data is internal to the cloud provider's network. There's no external traffic apart from the management to push the plan details to those cloud instances. And at the same time, we can also use that cloud-based RPS to receive replicated recovery points from our on-prem RPS. Similarly, if we have most or all of our production workload in the cloud, we can protect those on a cloud-based RPS. But if you want to have a physical copy of that data, we can replicate from the cloud-based RPS back to an on-prem RPS. And because of the deduplication and compression that UDP uses, the amount of data that we actually need to transfer is significantly less than the actual protected workload. So from a replication perspective, let's take a look at how that would work. So let's go back to our Arcserve UDP console. Now, in this particular example, I'm going to assume that you already have a cloud-based Windows instance running with with Windows installed on it, and you have network connectivity between the two sites. Obviously, the way this is set up is going to be different for the different cloud providers, but because RPS is software that runs on Windows, as long as the Windows component and the network connectivity is working and configured, we can continue with this process. Within the UDP console, in the resources section again, we'll go to the recovery point service section. And you can see here I have RPS01 and RPS02. Similar to the diagram we saw, these are my two on-prem RPS servers. Now, if I want to add another recovery point server, I can click on Add a Recovery Point Server, and I'm going to add it just as if I was going to add an on-prem machine. Now, this machine I've set up for other demonstrations. It's called MSP01, and I've got a host file that fixes the actual destination based on where this is. So I'll put my credentials in, and then I'll hit Save. So now what the UDP console is going to do, it's going to check if it can connect with this particular machine. It's going to check if the RPS software is installed. If it isn't, it'll push the software out and install it. Now in this case, you can see it's already added the MSP in. I've already used this previously for other demos, as I mentioned. And you'll notice that there is already a data store created on this particular box. If there wasn't, I can just right-click and add a data store. And how to add a data store is kind of beyond the scope of today's session. But you can see here that I've just added this particular point server in. I have a data store. Now what I can do is come back to my plan, and let's use this client backup plan that we've been using so far today. If I open that up, I can add another task here if I'd like. And this time, I can choose a replicate task here. I'll choose replicate. The source is backup from task 1. So it's going to take the recovery point that was made here in task 1. And the destination is going to be the recovery point server. You'll notice I have 2 recovery point servers I can choose. I have 3 in my environment. However, RPS01 is where my task 1 backup is going, which means I can't replicate to that because it's the same box, but I have the other recovery point servers available. So if I want to send this to the cloud, my MSP instance here, I can select that. I can set my network retry. I can go to schedule. Here I can set when the replication begins. By default it's empty, which means that replication will start as soon as the backup finishes. If I want replication to start between certain hours, I can click on Add and add a replication schedule. I also have the ability to add a throttle schedule. So I can choose particular days of the week and start and end times, and during those times I can set a maximum bandwidth for replication. For now, for this demo, I'm going to leave that empty. And then lastly, underneath here, we can set the retention on the target RPS. So we don't have to keep the same number of backups on both sides. We can choose to keep a custom number. So I might want to keep 10 weeks of weekly backups, but I might only want to keep one custom backup. So I can customize this number, and then under Advanced, I can choose to enable email alerts if I want, and then I can hit Save. So when we save this plan, again, you'll notice that because we're doing file copy or file archive, it's asking for a pre-flight check. I'll say no to that now. But we've saved those details. Now the next time that a backup runs, it will also do a replication. If we don't want to wait for the next backup and we want to kick off a replication now, we can come back to all nodes. We can come to that particular PC that was in the plan. I can right-click, and then I can click on Replicate Now. I also have the option of expanding the plan groups, and I had a client backup plan. If I had multiple servers or machines under this plan, instead of having to click on each one individually, I can come to the plan level, and I can right-click and say Replicate Now. And that will force an immediate replication without waiting for the next backup to run. So replication, if it's running in the cloud or if it's running on-prem, it's essentially the same methodology. We can handle it as long as we have our RPS and the data stored on that RPS running. So the next one we're going to look at is the Arcserve UDP recovery point copy to tape and also cloud. So we'll be, within Arcserve UDP, we have the ability of taking a recovery point that's in the recovery point server, and we can rehydrate that dedupe backup and send it as a full backup to tape through Arcserve Backup R17. There is integration between Arcserve UDP and Arcserve Backup R17 that allows, through the UDP console, for us to set up a job that will send the backup to tape. We can choose to send dailies, weeklies, or monthly recovery points to tape through the UDP console. A word of note, however, the copy to tape is really ideally designed for the long-term retention for compliance or business practices, business rules, and holding that data for long-term retention. The copy to tape is not really designed to do a daily backup to tape. And the reason for that is because we have to rehydrate the data and we have to do full backups of the recovery points, it can sometimes take more than a day to send a full copy of all of your data to tape. So for that reason, just be mindful that it's probably best to do at most weekly backups to tape. Most of our customers are looking to relegate and reduce the amount of tape usage, so they tend to do monthly or quarterly backups to tape. That said, for those of you who are familiar with Arcserve UDP version 5, we could do the same copy to tape functionality through the Arcserve Backup console. And with Arcserve UDP version 6, we can still use that method through the Arcserve Backup console. And if we do it that way, we can also send a full backup to not only tape, but to other disk, and cloud destination. And when we say cloud, it'll be object store, such as Amazon S3 and Microsoft Azure. And the way this works is, as I said, we're using Arcserve Backup because that's where our tape engine resides, but we can install Arcserve Backup on the recovery point server itself. So we'll have a source server backing up and sending a recovery point to a recovery point server. We'll then have the recovery point being sent to an Arcserve backup server, which will then push that to tape. We can put both the Arcserve backup and the RPS on the same box so that we reduce the need to keep pushing data across the network. It's on the local box. You can do it locally. And if we want to then send it to cloud using this method, we can do so. We rehydrate to a staging disk, and that's going to be a local staging disk. And then from there, we can send the final destination to the cloud. So this sounds like it might be a little complicated. It's not that complicated, so let's go take a look at how we'd actually do that. Again, what we'll do is we'll start with the UDP console method. So I'll open up my UDP console again. What I'm going to do is set up a copy to tape job. So let's go back to our plan. And let's use the client backup as an example. So let's open this client backup plan. So we've done quite a lot of different tasks, and we can add another one here. We'll click on Add a Task. This time, we're going to do Copy to Tape. This time, the source of our copy to tape, we can select whether it's going to be the initial local backup, or if we want to do a copy to tape from the remote side where we've replicated. So if we had multiple sites, perhaps different branch offices, and they were all replicating back to a central site, you could choose to do your copy to tape at the central site, meaning that you don't have to invest in tape drives or loaders in every single site. You can have your IT team at your primary site handle the tape change, which reduces the reliance on non-IT staff to do tape rotations and the like. For this example, I'm going to do task 1 as my source. And then, because I only have weekly backup set up, I am going to make sure that weekly backups is ticked here. If I came back to task 1, and if I were to change my schedule, so I'll come to the Schedule tab here, and if I was to add a monthly backup schedule, for example, I'll just keep that. So I've now added a monthly in. If I come back to Copy to Tape, and I'll go back to my Source tab, you'll notice that I now have an option to tick a monthly. Now, one other thing to note, if you're doing a copy to tape, we can perform an individual file or folder restore directly from the tape. We don't have to restore the entire tape content first. However, if we want to do that granular file folder restore, we do need to enable cataloging of the UDP backup. And that's what this information sentence here under monthly is telling us. Now, I didn't have this for the weekly because I already had weekly backups being cataloged. So you'll see here the monthlies is telling me I need to enable cataloging if I want to do granular file folder restore. So let's go back to our backup and to our schedule here. You'll notice here under cataloging, weekly is ticked. Let's tick monthly backups as well. And if we come back to Copy to Tape and go back to our Source tab, monthly is ticked, but we no longer have that message because cataloging is enabled. If you do not tick cataloging, you can still do Copy to Tape, but it will back up the entire raw session. What that means is if I want to do a restore, I will need to do a full tape restore first. So if I want granular file folder restore from tape, I must catalog in UDP. Next, we go to destination. So within the UDP console, I need to have added the Arcserve backup server as in my list. And in this example, RPS01 is the server that also has Arcserve backup installed on it. So that's my Arcserve backup server here. Media group refers to the device, whether it's a tape drive or a loader, that I'll be sending my backup to. So I might want to send this to my LTO6 drive, or maybe I want to send it to this LTO5 library. I then have options for multiplexing, encryption, and compression. And underneath, it's showing me contents of this particular library. So I have about 19, 20 slots full of tapes in this particular library. Once that's selected, I'll go to schedule. Now, like replication, this window at the top says when the tape backup will start. If it's empty, it means that the tape backup will start after the backup finishes. Otherwise, I can click on add, and I can add a schedule for when I want the tape backup to begin. Now, if the tape backup doesn't finish before this window ends, the tape backup will continue. When we add a copy of the tape schedule, it's only a schedule for when the tape copy will start, and it will continue until it actually finishes. I'm going to leave that blank so that tape copy happens after my backup finishes. And then here we've got options for retention. So by default, it's going to want to create a new media pool for each plan that we set. Now, if you're happy for that to happen, you can leave that blank and you can select what your retention will be. So in this case, it'll create a new media pool called Client Back 5. You can customize this if you wish. I might want to put a different pool name in. And then for retention, for the week, because I'm doing weeklies and monthlies, these are the only two options I'm presented with. So by having 5 and 12 here, it means that it will not overwrite any tapes until the 6th week. So I know that any tapes that have been made are protected for 5 weeks, and any monthly backups that are made, those tapes are protected for 12 weeks. I then have options to copy to separate tapes, or I can append to this. Now, these selections that you make here are really going to be dependent on how you plan on rotating tapes, and what the number of tapes your backup needs are, and the capacity of your loader, or if you're looking to manually swap out tapes on single drives. If you're setting up multiple plans, maybe you want them all to use the same media pool, in which case you can hit the drop-down box, and you'll see here I've previously created a media pool called DC01, and this particular media pool, you can see it's grayed out because I can't modify it, but it's using the retention from this media pool, which is 5 weekly and 3 monthly. So if I want to use this, I'm happy to proceed. I can go to advanced, and then I have the options to eject and verify the jobs, as well as running pre and post backup tasks. Once this is done, I can hit save. And what will happen is the UDP console will communicate with the Arcserve backup console and create the job in Arcserve backup for us. Now this screen again has popped up because we're doing file copy and file archive. I'm going to say no again just to save some time. So now we've got a tape copy job set up for the client backups as well. Now, I also have the option of setting up a job manually in Arcserve Backup. So to do that, what I'll need to do is open the Arcserve Backup console. So what I'm going to do, I'll open up the console on my recovery point server here. So this is the quick start or startup screen that we see. To set up a job manually, I can click on Backup Manager here in Quick Start, or I can click on the Quick Start drop-down and select Backup. It'll take me to the same place. If I want to do a copy to tape through here, I just select the normal backup. I can then open Source. And in this tree, in this classic view, around halfway down, we've got Arcserve UDP recovery point servers. Now, if I expand this, I've actually got my 2 RPSs here. If I didn't, I can just right-click on it and click on Add RPS Server. In this case, I've already got them here. If I expand these recovery point servers out, it will give me a list of all the servers that have recovery points inside that RPS. What I can then do is I can select individual machines that I want to do a copy to tape, or I can select the entire recovery point server, and this will basically make a full backup of the latest recovery point for each of these servers in the RPS. Once I'm happy with that choice, I click on Schedule. So here I have some more options. Maybe I want to do this, as I mentioned, we've got customers who might want to do quarterly backups, or they might want to do half-yearly backups. So here we can set up a custom schedule where we can say, you know, every 3 or every 6 months we can do a backup. And because we're doing a UDP recovery point backup, they must be full backups. We'll then go to destination, and we can choose where we're going to send the backup to. You'll see in this case I've actually got a disk location here. I've got my LTO5 library, and I've got my LTO6 drive. So maybe I want to send it to the LTO5 library. Once I select that, I can hit Submit. I can provide my credentials for the RPS. And then here I can give this a name and choose when I want to run this particular job. So I'm just going to say Submit on hold because I don't want it to run right now, but I'll say OK. And now we're in the job status screen. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So you can see here we've got this custom backup that we've made. And you'll notice here in the light blue, we've actually got the client backup plan, and the previous plan I had made from the UDP console is already made the plan for us, the jobs for us in Arcserve Backup. And you'll notice that from an execution time, here it's telling us follow the UDP schedule. So the UDP console is going to be telling the Arcserve Backup console when to start that backup. So this is the way we used to do it in version 5. You can still do this with version 6. However, Arcserve Backup also supports backup to cloud devices. So what we need to do in order to be able to do our UDP backup to cloud to object store such as S3 is we first need to make sure we have a cloud account and a cloud device created in Arcserve Backup console. So to do that, we'll click on Quick Start. We'll go to Administration and then Device. This is going to show us the different devices that are connected to the Arcserve Backup server here. You'll notice here I have a number of different devices, and 2 of these here called CDO1 and CDO2. These stand for cloud devices. I've already got them here, but if you want to add one, first thing we need to do is you'll notice in the bottom pane here it says Manage Cloud Connections. I'll click on this, and you'll notice I have different types of cloud providers, including S3 and Azure. I wanted to add a new account, I can just click on the S3 heading. I'll click on Add. I'll give the connection a name and put my credentials in. Just like with the UDP file copy and file archive, what I can do, sorry, I'll come back to that screen. What I can do here is put the URL for the endpoint for my particular region in. So if I wanted to create one in Sydney, for example, I'd replace this default URL with the Sydney endpoint URL. I put the rest of my credentials in. I will put my bucket name that I want to use, and I have the option of using reduced redundancy storage. So I can add my account in here. Now I'm not going to go ahead and do that. I already have my account details here. So you can see here for this, if I go to modify, it already has my details in. It's using AP Sydney as my bucket region, and this is the name of the bucket I'm using. Once you have a cloud account or a cloud connection configured, we can go ahead and manage cloud devices. So my accounts are in here. I can close this screen. And then I can click on Manage Cloud-Based Devices. So I can click on this, and then you'll notice I've got CDO1 and CDO2 as these cloud devices. So I can hit Add. I can put in another name, so maybe CDO3. I can put a description in if I'd like. And then I can choose which account I want to use, which cloud connection I want to use. So if I want to use my Sydney AP one, I'll choose that. I'll put a cloud folder that I'm going to be storing my backups in, provide a password and a group name. Now I've already got these two cloud devices, so I'm not going to create the third one. I'm just going to go ahead and click Cancel. As they say in the cooking shows, here are my ones that I've created earlier. CDO1, you can see here, CDO1 is going to the bucket region Singapore, but I have CDO2, and that's going to bucket region here, Sydney. Now once I've got my cloud devices set up, I also need a disk device. So I can click on Manage Disk-Based Devices. And the reason I need a disk location is I need a staging area where the rehydrated data will be put, and then from there it will be sent to cloud. So it's going to be a temporary location. So I've got some file system devices here already. And these can be on a local disk, they can be on a share, they can be on a NAS somewhere else. So to add a new one, I just click on Add, and then you can put the name, description, and the location in. You'll notice here, in this case, my file system devices, 1, 2, and 3 are on this NAS location. And then once you put all the details in, you can save that. Again, I've already got these locations set up. Once that's done, we can now create the job to do a UDP copy to tape that actually goes to cloud. So again, we'll click on Quick Start here, and we'll load Backup. And under the Start tab, what we're going to do is enable staging. By enabling staging, it'll allow us to select the cloud device as our final destination. So staging is ticked. The normal backup, we'll go to Source. Again, we're going to select the recovery point servers and the servers underneath. We'll go to Schedule, and we will select the schedule we want to use. Now you'll notice that we have a couple of extra tabs now that we've enabled staging. So under Staging here, we're going to choose our file system device, our disk location to be the staging location. We'll then go to Policies, and here we can choose when do we want the copy to the final destination to take place. So pretty much we want that to happen after the backup to the staging finishes. So we'll leave that as 0, If you want to keep it on the staging location for longer, you can increase this time period. But for now, we'll leave that 0. And then under destination, we're going to choose our cloud destination. So maybe we choose this cloud 2, which goes to our Sydney region bucket. Once that's done, we can hit submit. Just like before, we can go OK, give it a name, and then hit OK. And there is our backup job that will go to cloud. Again, keeping in mind that we're doing full backups. So again, if we're sending to cloud, we really want to do this as just a full copy of our backup for DR purposes. If something happens, site failure, we want to bring it back, we've got the full backup available there. With that, that pretty much covers today's session. As I mentioned, today's session was the 3rd in our 3-part UDP features series. If you missed a previous webinar in the series, we do have the recordings available on demand. So the first 2, bare metal and granular restore, and replication, virtual standby, and instant VM are available right now if you go to those URLs. The recording for this webinar will be available shortly after it concludes. So it will be available through that link a little later on. But as I said, if you've missed it, you can watch it on demand. But until then, if you are interested in more information, you want a deep dive session, you want a more detailed demo or a WebEx, or if you just have any general questions, whether it might be technical or commercial or licensing related, you can contact myself or Andrew Huntley, who is a Partner Account Manager for ANZ. Both his and my details are on the screen there. So feel free to give us a call or send us an email, and we're more than happy to help. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes, but I will open it up. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to go through those. So just check here and see if anyone has raised anything, or everyone's been happy with what I've gone through. All right. That's great. Looks like I've answered many things that may have, questions that may have already been raised. So again, if you do think of anything afterwards, I'll leave my details on screen for a little bit longer. But thank you for your attendance today. And if there are any other questions or anything that might be Arcserve related, by all means, please let us know. We're happy to help. And we will see you in a future webinar. Thank you.